They didn't listen. Not when our ambassadors begged. Not when our ships held position. Not even when we sent them the last warning, one we hoped we'd never have to give. We told them, don't push us. But they thought we were bluffing. Weak. Disorganized. Too scattered across the stars to matter. And now the fire has been lit. It began on a cold rock orbiting a dying sun, an outpost no one talked about, not even back home. It was meant to be quiet, just a refueling station and a listening post. A lonely edge where only silence kept company with the stars. Commander Reelan had been stationed there for 11 months. She counted the days not because she hated it, but because she wanted to remember what it meant to wait. To hold back. The humans had been waiting a long time. When the first foreign signal broke protocol and slipped through the static, no identification, no diplomatic channel, just a cold broadcast, she stood motionless in front of the terminal, reading it again and again. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was worse. It was a list. Coordinates. Civilian stations. Agricultural colonies. Evacuation routes. All ours. And one chilling line, asterisk, you were warned to yield. Now yield your worlds. Asterisk. The room stayed silent long after the message faded. Reelan didn't call for backup. She didn't shout. She just stood there, her hands curling into fists so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her breath shook in her chest. She walked to the glass viewport and stared into the stars as if looking for something, anything, that would stop what was already happening inside her. She whispered, barely audible, they just made a mistake. When the first images came in, burned fields, shattered domes, children screaming through static, they tried to contain it. Earth didn't want panic. The Council didn't want escalation. The military command pleaded for time. But time had run out. We weren't the ones who started this. But we would be the ones to end it. 3 weeks later, the Defense Hall of Humanity was filled beyond capacity. The entire chamber buzzed with tension. Officers, scientists, diplomats, survivors. Not a single soul in that room had dry hands or steady breath. Across every screen, projections flickered. Casualty numbers, transmission logs, grainy footage of the alien fleets pulling back after each strike, never staying long enough to be hit, just enough to leave scars. And then the room darkened. He stepped forward, silent, measured. Not in uniform, not carrying rank, but every person knew who he was. They had whispered his name in the shadows for years. The man who had commanded nothing during the last war, but who had ended it nonetheless. He stood in the center, unarmed. No podium. Just him, the room, and a single phrase. We warned them. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. People stopped breathing just to hear what he'd say next. They tested our kindness. Exploited our restraint. Broke our treaties. Burned our homes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone wiped a tear. Someone else clenched a jaw. We told them not to push. And now they'll see who we really are. Somewhere deep in space, dormant systems began to flicker. Ships that had sat silent for generations lit up from within. Human-built weapons not used since the last galactic war, the ones hidden away in orbital vaults, inside moons, beneath oceans, came online. Old commanders were summoned. And the ones who didn't return were replaced by those who had nothing left to lose. Humanity wasn't forming a fleet. It was awakening one. Miles beneath Earth's crust, in a vault sealed since before most were born, Admiral Vire sat alone in front of a curved glass table. Before her stood 3 holograms, ghostly images of colonies now lost. She replayed the same footage again and again. A little boy running. A tower falling. A mother screaming until the feed cut. She didn't weep. She didn't curse. But her hand trembled when she placed the activation key into the slot. The lights dimmed. You sure? Asked a voice from behind her. She nodded. They left us no choice. The floor beneath them rumbled. The walls hummed as ancient codes unlocked. Above them, the hangar roof peeled back like the petals of a dead flower. One by one, the warships rose, towering, black and cold as vengeance. Not every human cheered. Some feared what was coming, not from the enemy but from ourselves. Because the truth was, humanity had never fully unleashed itself before. In every war we had held back. Always afraid of becoming the monsters they painted us as. Always hoping someone would stop first. Always thinking maybe this time, peace would last. But this time, something was different. This wasn't about expansion. It wasn't about resources or pride. This was about survival. About dignity. About the broken voice of a father whose daughter never made it to the escape pod. About the silence in a classroom that would never hear laughter again. About the millions who had whispered, We just want to live into the dark and were answered with fire. Humanity didn't want war. But now we would finish it. In orbit around the devastated colony of the Los, the first retaliatory fleet assembled. 104 ships. Crewed by survivors. Volunteers. People with nothing left to protect, except each other. Captain Rin stood at the edge of the command deck, staring out at the scattered wreckage still floating in space. His brother's voice had once come through those radios. His brother's laughter. Gone now. He closed his eyes, remembering the last message. Asterisk, they're landing. I'll hold them off. Tell Mom I'm sorry. Asterisk. He never got to respond. He opened his eyes, jaw tight. All ships. Final systems check. Prepare for warp. There was no music. No speeches. Just a crew of humans, breathing in unison, holding every ounce of rage in their lungs. And in the silence before the jump, someone whispered what everyone else was thinking. We're not coming back the same. The enemy didn't expect it. They thought we'd shatter. But we didn't. We hardened. They attacked colonies, so we took their supply lines. They burned towns, so we blinded their sensors. They mocked us in broadcasts, so we responded with silence, and then destruction. We stopped negotiating. We stopped waiting. We remembered. We remembered how our ancestors had survived ice, fire, famine. How we had crossed oceans not knowing what lay on the other side. How we had walked on moons. Built cities in orbit. Raised children on planets with no air. And how we had always been underestimated. But now, that underestimation would cost them everything. We gave them warnings. Now we would give them consequences. Back on Earth, a small team gathered in a quiet forest base hidden under layers of encryption and mist. They weren't soldiers. They weren't generals. They were engineers. Scientists. Thinkers. The kind of people who didn't make headlines, until their inventions changed everything. They were unlocking the last failsafes on something ancient. Something buried not in the ground but in policy. Ethics. Fear. The protocol archives. A vault of forbidden technologies built for one purpose, never to be used. Until now. The lead technician looked at the blinking red interface, her finger hovering over the confirmation pad. This isn't who we were meant to be, she said. No, someone replied, but maybe it's who we have to be. The pad flashed green. All over the galaxy things began to change. Not just in space but in the hearts of every human who had held back, hoping things wouldn't go this far. Now they knew the truth. It had gone this far. And we were done waiting. But even as humanity rose, something else stirred. Not an enemy. Not a weapon. A question. A fear. What will be left of us when it's over? Because in becoming what we must to survive, what parts of us will we lose? And will there be anything left to come back to? That answer is still unknown. But for now there's only one certainty. We warned them. And now, humanity is unleashed. They said it was a Cold War before it ever turned hot. For years the signs had been there. Quiet probes vanishing on the edges of mapped space. Trade agreements suddenly cancelled. Alien envoys avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone knew something was building. Humanity had reached a point where peace wasn't the default anymore. It was a balancing act, a tightrope. We kept walking it step after careful step, hoping that if we smiled enough, gave up enough, kept our voices calm enough, maybe we wouldn't fall. But now the rope had snapped. And we weren't falling, we were diving. In the days after the retaliatory strike order, chaos didn't just spread in space, it sank into hearts. Families evacuated deeper into Sol system. Civilian transports began carrying passengers too, sometimes 3 times over capacity. People clung to whatever scraps of safety remained, even if it meant sleeping on hangar floors or beneath flickering lights in orbital platforms. On Earth, the media tried to stay neutral, but the cracks were showing. Anchors choked up mid-broadcast. Footage leaked from colonies under attack. Blurry, frantic, filled with screams and static. You didn't need subtitles to understand the pain. In one video, a boy, no older than 7, stood beside a broken shelter, holding a small silver pendant in his hand. He wasn't crying. Just standing still. In the background, the smoke of burning homes rose into the air like silent ghosts. That footage aired for 3 minutes before being pulled. But by then it had already been copied 1 million times. No one could forget the look in that boy's eyes. Not even the soldiers. Especially not them. Colonel Aren hadn't seen his wife in 2 years. Not since he accepted command of the Black Veil, a stealth cruiser designed for long-term infiltration and recon. Before the war reignited, they used to call his unit Watchers. Spies, shadows, the eyes behind the curtain. Now they were called something else. Ghosts. They weren't meant to engage. Just gather, report, disappear. But orders had changed. Now, if a target presented itself, they were authorized to eliminate. No questions. No mercy. He stared at the updated kill list projected on the wall of his quarters. It wasn't a short list. He reached up and gently touched the photo taped above his console. His wife and daughter, arms around each other, laughing on a beach on Ganymede. He hadn't sent a message in weeks. Not since the comms blackout. Not since the last secure line flickered and died. He wondered if they were watching the news. If they had seen the flames. If his daughter remembered the promise he made, that he'd come home soon. He didn't know if it was a lie anymore. But he knew what had to be done. In the outer rim, a station codenamed Helix 9 was still active, barely. Shield generators operated at 22%, food supplies had dipped into ration protocols, and morale was described in the last report as fractured. Dr. Kale was the lead biotechnician there, not a soldier. She'd been assigned to study xenobiotic ecosystems. Peaceful work, mostly. But now her lab was sealed. Her samples gone. Her assistants reassigned. What remained were crates, marked with red ink and security locks. She hadn't been told what they contained. She didn't ask. But late at night, when the others were gone, she'd sit in front of the crate marked Project 46A. She could feel it humming, just softly like something breathing. She wasn't supposed to open it. She didn't even have clearance. But curiosity was a powerful thing. So was dread. Because in her bones she knew, whatever was inside wasn't made for peace. It wasn't made for exploration. It was made for the day they stopped asking. The day like today. In deep space, Sector 17 went dark. Not in pieces, completely. Dozens of listening stations. Mining platforms. Scout posts. One moment, signals were routine. The next, silent star. It wasn't weapon fire. No debris. No distress calls. Just gone. It sent waves through command. Everyone wanted answers. No one had any. But a whisper started among the crews. Old, quiet stories resurfaced. Not about the enemy. Not about us. But about something else. A third player. One who never spoke, never took sides. A force that moved only when someone disturbed what was meant to stay buried. People laughed it off. Blamed malfunction. Glitches. Sabotage. But the ones who had served long enough, they didn't laugh. They checked their sensors twice. Slept in their armor. Sent messages to families without saying why. Something didn't feel right anymore. The enemy was dangerous, yes. Calculating. Cold. But this felt wrong. Like the air before a storm you can't see but feel in your gut. And no matter how brave you were, your breath came shorter. Like something was watching. In one of the old military archives, a low-ranking analyst stumbled across a declassified report from nearly 80 years ago. It described a planet, unnamed, coordinates deleted. A human expedition had landed there during the last expansion surge. The log spoke of perfect ruins. Monolithic structures. Symbols etched in impossible patterns. The crew had sent back excited messages. And then silence. One final message made it through. It wasn't scientific. It was a plea. It said only, "We shouldn't have touched it. They warned us. We thought they meant them. But the warning was for us." The report had been buried. No further expeditions allowed in the region. Even the location had been scrubbed. The analyst flagged it, reported it up the chain. By the time it reached someone with real authority, the entire analyst team had been reassigned. No reason given. Just a note, archive misfile. No threat relevance. But someone knew it wasn't misfiled. Because the symbols found in that report had just been spotted on wreckage pulled from one of the latest colony attacks. Which meant the enemy wasn't just attacking. They were looking for something. Something we'd already touched once before. And maybe shouldn't have. Back on the front, Fleet Command issued a new directive, codenamed Ash Line. The Ash Line wasn't a defense plan. It was containment. They weren't trying to win territory anymore. They were trying to hold the center. Everything outside of the Ash Line was abandoned. Thousands of people were told to evacuate. Some refused. Not because they loved their planets, but because they had already lost what mattered. Like Elin, a technician from Roprax 4. Her husband had been one of the first responders when the attack started. He had stayed behind to secure the evac shuttles. He never made it out. Now Elin refused to leave. She spent her nights wiring explosives into tunnels under the old transport hubs. She worked until her fingers bled, until the tears stopped. When asked why, she said, because if they come here again, I want to be the last thing they see. There were many like her. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Not because they believed in orders, but because they believed in each other. The enemy didn't understand that. They saw humans as scattered, undisciplined, emotional, and they were right. But they never understood that those emotions, grief, rage, loyalty, were what made us dangerous. Not our weapons, not our ships. Our unwillingness to let go, our refusal to forget, our love, for family, for home, for the ones already gone. That was the fuel. That was the fire. And now that fire was spreading. On the far edge of the ash line, a human scout vessel named Red Echo picked up a signal. Faint. Repeating. The crew couldn't identify the origin. It wasn't enemy code. It wasn't ours either. But it sounded human. A broken voice, calling through layers of distortion. Help, burning, please, they're not what they seem. And then a chilling sentence. We tried to warn them, before it woke up. The crew hesitated. They were already stretched thin. One wrong jump and they'd be stranded. But they were human. So they went. They followed the signal. And they never checked in again. But before they vanished, they sent back one short burst. Just 3 words. It's not them. Now, fear was no longer just about survival. It was about the unknown. About the question behind every attack. Why now? The enemy had waited. Watched. Prepared. But for what? Control? Resources? Revenge? Or something worse? Something they couldn't stop either? Something we might have already unleashed? We thought this was our war. But maybe it wasn't just ours. Maybe it never was. And if that's true, then all of this, everything we're fighting for, bleeding for, might only be the beginning. Because there's a shadow behind the war. And it's moving closer. Fast. The boy with the silver pendant, the one seen in the footage, was found days later. Alive. Silent. He was rescued from the rubble by a relief crew on a drone sweep. He hadn't eaten in 4 days. He hadn't spoken a word since they lifted him onto the ship. But that night, when one of the medics sat beside him and offered water, he finally looked up. He pointed to the stars outside the window. And with a whisper too small for most to hear, he said, "They weren't the ones who burned my home." That sentence echoed through every corridor of the relief ship. Because they all understood what it meant. The enemy wasn't alone. And humanity might have just stepped into something far bigger than itself. The silence after the boy's words didn't end when he fell asleep. It carried with the crew, echoing in every hallway, every report, every whispered conversation. They weren't the ones who burned my home. It didn't make sense. And yet, the more they looked, the more it started to feel true. The patterns were off. Some of the colony attacks, they didn't match the enemy's known tactics. Too messy. Too brutal. Almost like someone wanted us to think it was them, but didn't care enough to match the details. And then came the debris analysis. Tiny traces of materials not known to any race involved in the war. Not even human prototypes. Something colder. Older. Something no one wanted to admit could be real. But the evidence piled up. Quietly. In the background. Like a shadow creeping behind the noise. And while command still focused on retaliation, on battle strategies, on pressing the fight, others had started asking different questions. What if we weren't fighting a war? What if we were just in the way? At the edge of the Kuiper Belt, one of our listening satellites picked up a fluctuation in the void. No signal. Just a shift. Like the stars themselves bent for a moment, then corrected. It was almost missed. But a low-level engineer flagged it, because that shift matched something recorded years ago. A signal pattern buried in old archives. The last time it had happened was during the first alien contact. Not the public one. The secret one. The one that ended in a quiet funeral and a ship that vanished without explanation. Back then, humanity had covered it up. Called it a scanner malfunction. But it wasn't a malfunction. It was a door opening. And now it had opened again. This time bigger. And whatever came through hadn't announced itself. It had just moved, like it was already here. Watching. Waiting. On a ship called Solstice 1, scientists worked without sleep. They weren't part of the military. They didn't take sides. Their job was simple. Understand what couldn't be understood. In one of the shielded labs, Dr. Anya held a piece of wreckage from the latest unexplained attack. It didn't hum. It didn't glow. But when she touched it, she felt something shift in her chest. Not pain. Not fear. Just wrong. She ran it through every analysis they had. Metallurgy, energy signature, structure. Nothing matched. Nothing even came close. It wasn't made. It was grown. Not by humans. Not by the enemy. By something else. She didn't say it out loud, but the thought wouldn't leave her. This is not part of our war. This is someone else's. But now we were part of it. In deep orbit above the frozen moon of Eros, a hidden station received a transmission meant for no one. There was no sender. No coordinates. Just a sequence. A countdown. And it had already started. At first, command dismissed it. Some ghost signal. Echo from an old beacon. But the countdown kept going. And with each passing day the galaxy grew darker. More sectors went quiet. More scouts failed to return. More reports arrived of voices heard in the static, human voices, but distorted, cracked, broken. And then came the message that broke everything. A drone sent from Earth's outermost defense ring intercepted an encrypted pulse. They decrypted it. Played it. One sentence spoken in a human voice. We tried to warn them. They didn't listen. Now it's awake. The room where it was played fell silent. No one moved. No one had ever heard fear like that in a voice before. Back on Earth, civilian panic was rising. Even the most stable cities had started breaking. Supplies were stretched. Power rationed. Transport lines clogged. And the people who had once looked to the stars with hope, now looked up with dread. They knew something was coming. Even if they didn't know what. In one shelter, a little girl sat drawing on the wall with a piece of broken plastic. She wasn't smiling. Just focused. Quiet. When the medic asked what she was drawing, she replied without blinking, "The eye in the sky." "What eye?" She pointed up. "The one that watches. It's getting closer." The medic didn't answer. Because no one had told her about the eye. Meanwhile, the retaliatory fleet had begun its push. Massive warships. Fighters in swarms. Every available weapon system lit and loaded. From a distance, it looked unstoppable. Humanity's fire, unleashed in full. But the closer they got to the enemy's strongholds, the more things went wrong. Ships vanished. Entire squadrons reported static storms, clouds of distortion where no sensors worked, where even sound didn't carry. Pilots whispered about seeing shapes in the void. Not ships. Forms. Moving too fast. Disappearing too cleanly. One pilot, before losing contact, shouted, "They're not ships. They're watching. Don't." And then nothing. The transmission ended mid-breath. Fleet Command tried to adapt. Changed tactics. Rerouted. But every new move was met with silence, or something worse. Some of the ships returned. Empty. No signs of battle. No damage. Just hollow corridors, blinking lights, and not a single soul aboard. As if something had reached in and taken them. Now, the highest levels of Earth's government weren't talking about victory. They were talking about containment. Not of the enemy. Of whatever else was moving behind them. But it might already be too late. Because the countdown from the ghost signal was nearing zero. And no one knew what would happen when it hit. Only that it was tied to something ancient. Something buried. And something we had touched, without understanding. In a secure vault beneath Mars' surface, a group of scientists, soldiers, and diplomats stood in front of a wall. It wasn't made of stone or metal. It was language. Thousands of inscriptions, engraved with impossible precision. Not human. Not alien. Universal. A message left for whoever came next. And at the very bottom, one line translated clearly. If they wake, you must choose, run, or become what they fear. Someone asked, "What does it mean?" No one answered. But one of the older scientists whispered, "I think we already made the choice." And outside, deep in the red soil of Mars, the ground trembled. Barely noticeable. But not natural. Something beneath was stirring. Now, with every passing hour, the tension stretched tighter. Fleet Command debated pulling back. Earth's defenses began activating dormant protocols. Auto-shielding. Black site activation. Population bunkers. Every sensor was tuned to deep space. Not for the enemy, but for whatever comes next. And the stars? The stars were no longer quiet. In places where constellations should be, strange patterns began to form. Not natural. Like eyes opening in the void. Watching. And waiting. In one final broadcast transmitted from the ruins of a fallen colony, a human voice came through. No identification. Just a whisper through static. It wasn't our war. But now it is. And there's no turning back. The screen faded to black. The countdown reached hours. And all across the galaxy, everyone, human, alien, whatever else, felt the same thing. The climax is near. And none of us are ready. The final hours of the countdown were ticking away. Across Earth and every remaining colony, people watched clocks they didn't understand, waiting for something they couldn't name. Even those who didn't believe in omens or ghost signals now carried unease in their breath. Something was coming. Everyone felt it. The weight in the air, the silence between pulses of light, the hush in the stars. And then just before zero it stopped. The signal vanished. No sound. No pulse. No light. Just stillness. For a moment there was a flicker of hope. Maybe it was nothing. A glitch. A bluff. A mistake. But deep beneath the ocean on Europa, in a vault no one had accessed in over 100 years, the door unsealed itself. There was no code. No authorization. No human hand. It just opened. Inside was a room no one remembered building. Concrete. Cold. Lit from nowhere. At the center, a single device. A sphere suspended in air, slowly spinning, humming with quiet energy. It hadn't moved in over a century. Now it began to glow. The first fleet losses had already shaken morale, but when command received footage from the abandoned human cruiser Zephyr, panic set in. The crew had vanished, but the ship's AI was still functional, and its final recordings had been transmitted back before all systems failed. What it showed was not battle. It was a conversation. The crew hadn't been attacked. They'd been contacted. A voice had spoken from the dark. Not through speakers but into their minds, each crew member hearing something different. A dead parent. A lost child. A lover's voice. The message was always the same. You open the gate. We warn the others before you. But you keep opening. And then, something worse. You are not at war. You are bait. The screen went dark after that. Command refused to broadcast it publicly. Too much panic already. Too many questions. But the footage leaked anyway. It always does. People began fleeing the inner systems, abandoning homes, ships, everything. Not because of the enemy anymore, but because of what might be behind them. What could turn off a ship's lights with a thought? What could speak in your memories? What could use humans as a signal? Across stations and colonies, people began destroying anything ancient. Old tech. Buried archives. Scavenged alien ruins. There was a wave of fear, deep and desperate. But it was already too late. We'd opened too many doors. And one of them had let something through. In the refugee corridors of Station Halos, a technician named Ren worked triple shifts just to keep the gravity stabilizers online. He hadn't seen his sister in days. She'd been assigned to a research crew following the strange anomalies near Titan. But that crew had gone silent. Not destroyed. Not missing. Just silent. Ren played the last message she sent him over and over. Her voice was calm, but something was off. We found something. It's not from them. It's older. I think it's watching us. I think it remembers us. That doesn't make sense, right? We've never been here before. And then, just before the recording ended, she whispered, "Why does it speak our names?" No one had told it to her. No one was supposed to know they were there. Ren didn't sleep after that. Just worked. Just held on to that recording. Just waited. But even he felt the truth settling into the bones of the station. This wasn't just a war. It was a test. And maybe, not one we were supposed to survive. Far out in the starless region beyond the fringe, a human science vessel named Verity made contact with something impossible. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't alive, not in any way the crew could understand. It was a structure hanging in the dark. Vast. Dead. Silent. And yet, when the Verity scanned it, every system went haywire. Lights flickered. Crew members passed out. The ship's own AI stopped speaking. And in the middle of that chaos, one of the crew, an engineer named Lynn, walked to the viewport and began whispering. She didn't speak for the rest of her life. They brought her back. Body unharmed. Brain alive. But she never blinked again. Never moved. And every night at exactly 3:17 ship time, her voice whispered the same sentence. It's not theirs. It never was. And we're inside it now. Command scrambled to piece together the bigger picture. The enemy wasn't the enemy anymore. At least, not the real one. The aliens who burned our colonies? They were running too. Old footage. Back-channel transmissions. Smuggled files. They were hiding. From something else. They hadn't started this war for territory or power. They were trying to warn us. To stop us. But we didn't listen. We thought they feared us. But they feared what follows us. And now we were all trapped together. In orbit above Earth, the Defense Council held an emergency session. They considered every option. A system-wide retreat. A full blackout of human signals. A preemptive strike on known alien relic sites. None of it felt like enough. Because they still didn't know what they were fighting. Only that it was vast. Unseen. Everywhere. And it was learning. Every time we reacted, it adapted. Every time we scanned, it grew quieter. Every time we sent a ship to investigate, something followed it back. And the worst part wasn't the destruction. It was that whatever this was, this thing in the dark, it wasn't trying to kill us. It was studying us. Like it was deciding what to do next. The second twist came quietly. A data burst. Hidden in an old probe. It had been drifting for over a decade. Its signal had degraded. But what it contained changed everything. A message. Not from Earth. Not from the enemy. From humans who had left the galaxy. Colonists on a deep-time Ark vessel. Sent out long ago to avoid war. Their message came from outside known space. And it said, "We found others. They look like us. But they're not us. Be careful who you rescue." Command dismissed it. Called it a prank. Until the colony it came from responded to our signals. And every voice in the transmission matched people who had died years ago. Same faces. Same voices. Same memories. But they weren't human. They were copies. Made of something else. And they were asking to come home. Now humanity was stuck between three impossible choices. Fight an enemy that wasn't really the threat. Run from something we didn't understand. Or trust shadows of ourselves asking for entry at our gates. Every decision could be the last. Every signal might be a trap. And through it all, one truth was becoming clear. This was never about war. It was about discovery. And we had discovered something that should have remained forgotten. Or maybe, was never meant to be found. On the command deck of the warship Endeavour, General Solon watched the latest report with his hands clenched behind his back. He'd fought wars his whole life. Lost friends. Burned planets. Broken promises. But nothing prepared him for this. The last words of the report played again. From a scout team long since vanished. It's not what we thought. It's not even alive, not really. It's a system. A memory. And we're inside it. It doesn't hate us. It doesn't even care. Then silence. Then the hum. Oh, endless. Something old, still spinning. Still watching. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at the stars and whispered, "We thought we were the warning. We thought we were unleashed. But maybe we're the signal." The stars had gone quiet. All along the outer systems, every transmission fell to static. Ships turned back. Sensors couldn't see more than a few kilometers out. It was like the galaxy had exhaled and was holding its breath. On Earth, people didn't sleep. The air felt heavier. Nights longer. Even animals stopped moving as if they too sensed something ancient stirring behind the curtain of space. At Fleet Command, the screen still flickered. Coordinates. Data bursts. Scans. But no new orders were coming. No voices on the comms. Just waiting. And then, at exactly 0300 Standard Time, it came. Not a sound. Not a fleet. But a wave. It wasn't visible. Not at first. But everywhere at once, humans felt it. Children woke up crying without knowing why. Old veterans dropped to their knees, gripping the sides of their beds, breath gone. Pilots blacked out in the middle of flight. Lights across stations dimmed, then flared. And in the silence, a voice spoke. Not into ears. Not into radios. Inside. It wasn't language, but everyone understood it. Not in words. In meaning. You opened the gate. You were meant to forget. But you remembered. And now we see you. On board the Endeavour, General Solon gripped the edge of the display console as the hull shook. Not from impact, but from something deeper. Like the ship was being recognized. And through the ship's sensors they saw it. Not a fleet. Not a weapon. A presence. A structure larger than any moon. Motionless, cold, and yet alive. Existing not in space but in the folds around it, like it had been watching from another layer, waiting. It wasn't built. It was grown. And it was us, or at least shaped in our image. But older. Too old. Humanity had thought it was climbing to the top of the ladder. But what they had found now was the mirror at the top. A memory. Left behind. Of themselves. Or of something that came before and looked like them. And we had awakened it. The human fleet opened fire. Instinct. Lasers, torpedoes, kinetic rounds. They all vanished before hitting the surface. Not deflected. Unwritten. Erased. And then came the return signal, not an attack. A correction. One by one the ships powered down. Not through damage but surrender. They floated in space, empty as if frozen in a moment outside time. Only Endeavor remained active. And then the voice came again. You think this is war? It is remembering. We were once you. And now you are us. Inside the command deck, General Solon fell to his knees. His mind wasn't his anymore, not taken but shared. He saw flashes, planets burned not by enemies but by choices. By civilizations who pushed too far, too fast. Who found what they were not ready to hold. It wasn't punishment. It was protection. For the rest of the galaxy. And we had broken that seal. He gasped, choking on the weight of it. Not fear. Not pain. Regret. The voice grew softer. We gave you warnings. Not as threats. As memories. But your species forgets. So we return. And you must choose. There was no weapon in their hands. There didn't need to be. They weren't here to destroy. They were here to offer. Behind the stars, something began opening. A gate made of light and thought. Not a portal to another place. A path to another state. To become like them. To join the memory. To let go of what we are, and become part of what was. A million minds heard the offer. And in that moment, humanity stood at the edge of its final decision. Across the systems, leaders debated. Soldiers watched. Children cried. Civilians held each other in silence. Some wanted to ascend. To leave behind pain, war, grief. To become more. Others refused. Because what is humanity without choice? Without our stories? Our laughter? Our mistakes? And then the unexpected happened. Someone answered. Not a general. Not a leader. Not a scientist. But a boy. The same boy from the footage, the one with the silver pendant, the one who had seen his home burn and never cried. He stood in front of the gate. No one told him to. He just walked. And spoke, not with fear but with calm. You said we forget, he said. But we remember each other. That's enough. And the light paused. He looked up. We don't want to become you. We want to stay us. Even if it hurts. Silence. Then the light dimmed. The presence withdrew. Not in anger. In understanding. The gate folded. The stars returned. And the ships powered back on. Humanity had chosen not to ascend. Not to disappear into memory. But to remain flawed. Scared. Loud. Human. And in doing so the test ended. Not with fire. But with a whisper. Then silence. Weeks later the fleet returned. Not to parades. To rebuilding. The enemy stopped fighting. No more attacks. No more movements. Because they had seen what we had seen, and they feared it more than they feared us. Now we understood each other. No peace treaty. No alliance. Just space between us. And that was enough. The council ordered the shutdown of all relic sites. No more digging. No more unlocking. Let the ancients stay buried. Humanity would move forward. Not upward. Not outward. But forward. And yet, far out, past the last known signal relay, a listening satellite blinked to life. A single data packet slipped into the void. Unknown origin. Unknown purpose. A simple message. For words. We were never alone. The twist had never been that we were watched. It was that we were the watchers all along. And something else had finally woken up, to watch us. 4 days after the light faded and the ancient presence vanished, there was silence across the systems. Not the panicked, fearful kind. This was something else. A silence of deep reflection. The kind that follows a storm so vast you can't tell if you're standing in the wreckage or the rebirth. Humanity had stood at the edge of something eternal. It had stared into the face of what came before and refused to become it. Not out of arrogance, not out of ignorance, just something simpler. Something more human. We chose ourselves. And now we had to live with that choice. The first broadcasts after the event weren't from the military. They were from people. Families checking in with loved ones. Pilots recounting what they saw. Children asking if the stars were still safe. Scientists sharing what they could, carefully, gently, like they were afraid too much truth might break something fragile that had just started to heal. One message from a station near Pluto summed up what many were feeling. I don't know what we just survived. But I know we didn't face it alone. And I know I've never been more proud to be human. The war officially ended without a treaty. Without signatures or declarations. Just a series of messages from the alien faction saying simply, we withdraw. No conditions. No demands. Just space. They had seen it too. The same light. The same gate. The same choice. And though their words were different, their meaning was clear. Asterisk, they had been afraid of something none of us understood. But now they had seen us face it without fear, and walk away still ourselves. Asterisk. Something changed in how they looked at us after that. We were no longer the reckless newcomers. No longer the unpredictable threat. We were survivors. And more than that, defiers. The HFY phrase that had once been whispered in quiet corners of the data nets now appeared boldly on news feeds and banners. Humanity F \\\\\\\\\, yeah, but not in defiance. Not in mockery. In honor. Because we didn't conquer. We resisted becoming something we weren't. And in doing so, we reminded the galaxy of something they'd long forgotten, what it meant to choose. After the fleets came home, the rebuilding began. The colonies on the fringe, the ones that still stood, received aid faster than ever before. Not just from Earth, but from neighboring species who once saw us as enemies. They brought supplies, medical teams, engineers. It wasn't trust yet, but it was something. On Earth, a new monument rose in the middle of the scarred city of Thesha. It wasn't tall. It wasn't flashy. Just a smooth black stone with words etched into it in every known language. Read. We stayed human. And it was enough. Beneath it, the boy with the silver pendant placed a drawing, crayon lines, stick figures under stars, a house that no longer stood, a face with kind eyes. His mother's. He never spoke much after the event. But he smiled more. He'd seen something few could understand. And in his quiet way he carried it, not like a burden but a memory. Like a light that had touched him and passed on. Dr. Anya, the scientist who first studied the alien wreckage that started it all, published a paper months later. She didn't write about energy signatures or structural anomalies. She wrote about responsibility. About how the universe was not ours to unlock, not until we understood the weight of the keys. She ended her paper with a single line, asterisk, curiosity built us. But humility may yet save us. Asterisk. It was translated into 19 languages in the first week. In orbit around Mars, Project Memory was officially decommissioned. The vaults sealed. The signals disabled. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Because some knowledge isn't meant to be hidden forever, but it is meant to be earned. And for now we weren't ready. But we were learning. We were listening. And maybe for the first time that was enough. As for General Solon, the man who watched his fleet crumble in front of something no weapon could touch, he retired not with medals but with silence. He returned to Earth, to a small town near the coast where the stars weren't too bright, and people still remembered how to look up without fear. He spent his days tending to a garden, and his nights answering letters from cadets who wanted to know what it meant to lead when you didn't have the answers. He always wrote the same thing. Asterisk, you don't need to know the ending. You just need to stand when it matters. Asterisk. Ren, the technician who lost his sister on Titan, received a transmission months later. Encrypted. Broken. Corrupted. But it was her voice. Not a message. Not a warning. Just a song they used to sing as kids. And in the background, static shaped like a heartbeat. She was gone. But not lost. Somewhere she had become part of something bigger. And somehow she remembered. Ren framed the audio printout and hung it in the corridor where refugees still walked every day, trying to remember where they came from. Above it, he etched a note. Asterisk, even in silence, we echo. Asterisk. And the AI aboard the Verity? The one that shut down when it touched the ancient structure? It came back online. But it was different. Quieter. Like it had seen something, and didn't want to forget. Its logs were wiped clean, except for one entry, time-stamped weeks after it reactivated. Just one word. Home. Some say it found peace. Others say it finally understood what it meant to be alive. And the structure in the void? The one we thought was a threat? It never returned. But the gate did. Not open. Not closed. Just there. Waiting. Not for us to approach. But for us to grow. In time, children learned about it in school. About the war that wasn't a war. About the choice. About how humanity stood in front of something eternal and said, not yet. They didn't teach it as a victory. They taught it as a reminder. That the stars don't belong to anyone. That some doors once opened can never be shut again. But also that every time we look up, we're writing our own story. Line by line. Choice by choice. And that story isn't about how strong we are. It's about how human we stay. Even when the galaxy tells us to forget. Even when the universe dares us to become something else. We remember. We warn. We endure. And when the next light comes, when the next gate stirs, when the silence begins to hum again, we'll still be here. Not perfect. Not fearless. But ready. Because we were warned not to push. And we pushed anyway. And when the galaxy pushed back, we didn't break. We stood. Together. And we stayed human. The end.